Hey guys, welcome to book review number 126. Today I will be reviewing Stillwater, Finding Wild Mercy in the Outback by Rachel DeGrande. I had to look at that. So this is essentially like a travel book, but it's a cowboy travel book, or as they're known in Australia, station hands. It's about Rafael, a woman who it doesn't really give the explanations behind why she does it, other than that she kind of likes to change things throughout her life, but moves to work at a cattle station, also known in the United States as a ranch. Cattle station being the equivalent in Australia, in the York Peninsula, kind of in the what's known as the top end of Australia. It's an area that has a lot of scrubland, has a lot of areas that would be really hard for other agriculture, but work really well for low density cattle raising. And anyway, she goes to this place called Stilwater Station, which is the furthest station down the line, if you will, to a place where the line between domestic cattle and feral cattle is very thin. It's also a line where sort of modern meat works, if you will, don't really apply, in that because the density of the cattle has to be so sparse, you can't just raise these cattle in pens like you would in a lot of places in the United States. So it really takes traditional cowboys or ranch hands, if you will, Australian drovers, I believe they were called. Though drovers are actually a little bit different. Drovers would go across the open plain. I guess in a way this whole area was fenced in, but it wasn't like, except for special times when the cattle needed processing, that the cattle were in like tight pens where they were, fed hay. They were fed, for most of their lives, they were wild, or at least domesticated, free range cattle. So you get to meet some of the sort of crazier characters, like Miles, who is the musterer, and Wyatt, who kind of runs the station. He's kind of portly, but still very strong. I get the feeling that Wyatt walks with kind of like a waddle. Old school ranch hand that actually lives there rather than just as being hired on. You got Mike the mechanic, Vic and Cole that run the mustering crew. Basically like a lot of really interesting characters. Some who are, I mean, they're all rough around the edges, but some who are kind of more accepting of their positions, and others who are sort of the more wild bunch. There's a lot of need to dominate the land among these people, be it with, the motorbiking, or just things that most people do not see in their everyday lives, like the very sort of straightforward but very gruesome way that a cattle is slaughtered. Now, the majority of the cattle would not be slaughtered. They would be sent on pack farms to a slaughterhouse, but they would occasionally slaughter cattle for their own ends. They have to eat on this station, and probably the easiest food source way out in the middle of nowhere, that's fresh, is cattle. They also have, different fishing pots and crab pots and things like that. You just get the feeling that, they would be kind of known as good old boys here in the United States. But she does focus on some of the more beautiful aspects, or more redeeming aspects of the soul of nature that's this far removed from civilization. As I mentioned again, this is this Stillwater station, and really the top end stations all over Australia are very unique in that how much nature really dominates, and how you can't really sequester livestock in an area where it's easy to control. So you got people that need traditional cowboy riding or horse riding skills. She talks about her two horses, one which is a smaller gelding and one which is a chestnut I don't know, I'm not a big horse person, but that makes up a lot of this book about kind of her relationship with these horses. Let's see, what else? I guess she's not there during the wet season. She's there during the dry season, so that really the area gets almost no rain for about 8 months out of the year, but then it'll get 4 months of very intense rain where many cattle die and drown because the whole area that's very, very flat, which is good for finding cattle in the dry season because, you know, your horses ride on flat country, your motorbikes on flat country. But essentially it all floods and a number of the cattle die. Something you get kind of the feeling about this station was that it's sort of a numbers game where the owners, not just Wyatt who runs the station, but I believe they're the Lipthorns or something, or maybe the Crays, I don't know. It's a numbers game where they need to get cattle in, but if they lose a certain percentage, they don't particularly care because they're not exactly putting high amounts of money into these cattle that are essentially feral until they're caught and then sent to the slaughterhouse. Let's see, what else? Oh, the choppers. That's kind of an interesting aspect in that, you know, modern, not horticulture, you know, animal husbandry really relies upon almost all modern techniques, whereas, you know, our old idealistic image of animal husbandry has to do with, like, you know, the cowboys out on the range, and that's very much what this is. But then you get the helicopters, and one of the ways that they muster the helicopters is they get sort of like the bigger groups with the helicopters that come in. You know, they're small helicopters, but they scare the bejeebies because they can get like really close of these cattle, and that'll get the larger herds running. But then they'll have like the people on the motorbikes and the people on the horses, depending on the kind of environments they're in, if you will. They kind of intermingle and exchange just depending on the circumstance between motorbike and horse to keep these cattle in line, to make sure no strays run off course. You know, you can get the cattle motivated by a helicopter, but if you don't have sort of like a corralling mechanism, they're just going to run all over the place. So that was kind of an interesting aspect. As I mentioned, she talks about perspective, kind of the way time goes by, sort of how there's nothing kind of permanent, how it's all sort of lost to the sands and history of time in this place. It's a very impermanent place. Yeah, and just a lot about the characters. There's like a great fishing scene. She talks about like the rusted old motors that get caught up in the place. Well, oh, excuse me. First time I probably ever sneezed in a book review. Well, anyway, you guys, what time am I at? Oh, it's only at 8 minutes. Maybe I should talk a little bit more. Let's see if I can't find some pictures. You know, this would be like a typical picture of kind of the waterways that are there. You can see how flat it is, how meandering it is, how easily it would be for a river like this to flood if there was like a mass rain that happened. Cole, Wyatt, sure there's plenty of people I'm missing. There was one guy that was like a real hothead whose name I can't exactly remember. Yeah, you know, you get just a lot of scenes like this. She does provide pictures throughout the book, but it's not really a picture book. It's more a narrative book, if you will. Yeah, well, anyway, I'm sure there's a lot more I could have talked about here, but I'm missing. I think this might be Wyatt right here. And with that rap music playing behind me, I think I'm going to wrap this up. So, great book. Great if you love, if sort of the nicier end of travel kind of bores you because it's kind of all the same. Well, this is an area where most people don't go, where I wouldn't really recommend you go, but there's a lot of interesting stories on this place about how people kind of get by in a life that is very different from the rest that you and I live. And she does kind of underline the wild mercy of the and kind of very bestial nature, well, not bestial, but just kind of brutal nature of nature when you get out to it. You know, sometimes we think of nature as redeeming in a very easy way. In this book, Stillwater is redeeming, but it's redeeming in a very tough, gruff, but very interesting way that you don't see in your everyday life. So anyway, Stillwater, Finding Wild Mercy in the Outback by Rafael de Grandi. All right, check it out, you guys. I'll probably do some more reviews later. So, see ya. Bye.